Good morning. My name is Ravena, and today I will be presenting my paper entitled Sayaw Ginunting, a post-colonial analysis of a wedding dance. To begin, the Sayaw Ginunting, or known by its other name, sinulog, is a dance performed by a pair of sword-wielding or Ginunting-wielding dancers after a newlywed's formal Christian wedding. They lead the couple, dancing in a atras-abante manner, exchanging blows in a clashing and retreating choreography while moving from the church or chapel to the reception area. The dance ends with one of the dancers taking the white panyo, a piece of cloth from the bride, and present it to the matriarch of the house, or in some versions the maninay, as a sign of the bride's intentions of entering the family of her husband. For me, the performance of the Sayaw begs a great deal of significance to be observed and studied. Since, from my observations, the dance is quite uncommon, and even rare, especially to those in the lowland. Many of those who continue to practice it, like in the paper I am presenting, are situated in the rural communities or far from urban spaces. The movements of the dance, the costumes, the weapons, and even the use of music will be a topic of further research for those curious of what the dance might be of context. Thus, this paper investigates the wider context of the performance and how it is related to the periods of colonial and post-colonial local history and the environment which it is situated. This paper argues that the performance of the Saracen theme reflects the ambivalence of the colonial and post-colonial landscape which help indigenous systems to survive. Most of the primary data gathered in this research was from a 2017 fieldwork using a participant observation and research method in Barangay Trancama, Asin, Iloilo, which is 40 kilometers away from the city, supplemented by a separate account in Tubungan, Iloilo. The account in Tubungan was done by a partner university that was also part of the larger book project that ran from 2016 to 2018 by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the University of the Philippines, Visayas, which aimed to gather and preserve existing traditional knowledge in Panay and Guimaras. I plan to return to the site in 2020 to gather more data. However, due to the pandemic and quarantine measures, I was not able to return, thus the limitations in this paper. The project was mostly descriptive in nature, while this paper presents a deeper insight into a specific practice. So the questions asked in my paper are, in what ways does the performance of the Sayaw sa Ginunting fit in the larger context of space of traditional systems and practices in rural Iloilo? How does the Sayaw exhibit the nuances of colonial and post-colonial life in rural Iloilo? Finally, how does the Sayaw reflect resistance in the colonial and post-colonial setting? The outline of my presentation is thus follows. First, I will look into the ambiguity of the colonial and post-colonial landscape. Next, I will look into the role of the dance within the indigenous landscape. Also mention some similar dances that have similar characteristics to the Sayaw thing. I will then go into my main discussion of the dance performed in Maasin Tubungan, its meaning and role to the dancers, symbolism in its choreography and the costumes. I will also look into a preliminary insight into its possible roots. One of the first things that I want to point out is that the performance of the Sayaw reflects the ambiguous nature of the rural and post-colonial landscape. According to historian Reynaldo Ileto in his book entitled Filipinos and Their Revolution published in 1998, the rural colonial landscape can be divided into three realms. The first realm is where colonial control resides, and the church-convent complex, represented usually by a Spanish priest. The second realm is where the principales reside, or the native elites that were given positions to the colonial government. In the post-colonial setting, they will replace the church-convent complex or the first realm as the main source of power. The second realm are autonomous, but could connect themselves with the first realm in order to maintain their interests, or they would resist and ask for help in the third realm. Alternative communities that can be found deep into the mountainous areas. Continuing to reference Ileto, this realm is where enduring native or indigenous systems continue to exist and resist from any attempt of the first realm. They are led primarily by indigenous leaders, usually known as a spirit medium or individuals who could communicate with the divine beings of the pre-colonial natives. We can also see this in the Visayas region, where many of the Babaylan and followers fled to the mountains and continued to resist colonialism. There, facets of colonial religion was incorporated in the indigenous system. Many of these leaders possessed anting-anting inscribed with Latin prayers and would invoke the name of the Christian god and saints in order to protect them and to possess superhuman strength and sometimes be invincible and vulnerable to colonial firepower or weaponry. Among these is the famous Papa issue of Negros. I call this ambivalence of colonial discourse because while colonial religion was imposed primarily as a form of subjugation, it became a vehicle for resistance utilizing elements of colonial religion against the colonizers. I also see the character of the third realm and its interaction with the other realms as a form of carnival or carnivalesque according to Mikhail Bakhtin, where the status quo and rules imposed by the colonizers is erased, and thus the indigenous system triumphed. Moving on, where does the Sayaw fit in within the indigenous space? The practice of or performance of rituals are cultural facets in which society sought to understand its position between the seen and the unseen, giving a comprehensive normative input, according to anthropologist Clifford Geertz. In Panay, the performance of rituals is related to the enduring worldview based on oral mythology and folklore, maintaining harmony between man and the environmental spirits around him. According to the research of anthropologist Dr. Alicia Magos, the Sayo is part of a long list of rituals that has endured and survived that is performed from one's birth until death. Before dwelling further into the science of Ginunting, I reviewed other dances that have similar characteristics with the Sayaw and their discussions on the connections of the dance with the indigenous landscape. Among them is the Palo-Palo of the Ivatan community in Batanes. In the preliminary discussion of Professor Tiatco and his colleagues, he argues that the dance was inspired by the Commedia and that was localized as a native response to colonialism. It is, and I quote from the article, a post-colonial cultural product, end quote. It contributes to the community's cultural and historical identity. The Sagayan of the Maranao share similarities with the performance of the Saya. Kanami-Namiki's research reflects a deep-rooted identity that is tied with indigenous warfare ritual, a dance that is described as a movement of birds, all the while preparing oneself mentally before going to battle. However, historical developments in the region, brought by political and religious conflict, has changed the purpose of the dance into a dance that promotes peace and unity. The Sayaw in Aklan is performed during the January festivities honoring the Santo Niño or the Holy Child. While Professor Barrios also dwells with the concept of identity, it goes further to present its complexity, shifting identities or kalibugan, which is depicted from the choreography of the dance, the atras-abante choreography. My discussion and analysis of the Sayaw Ginunting shares some similarities with that of Professor Barrios. However, the main focus of my paper mostly resides in the dance as a representation of resistance, the ambiguity of the rural landscape. Further, I also delve deeper into the symbols that can be observed in the dance, revealing more connections with the indigenous space. Going to the main discussion of the Sayaw Ginunting, what does the sayaw mean for the dancers and to those who utilize the ritual? According to the dancers, The dance acts as a dance of good fortune, symbolically slashing away, cleaning any forms of sulay or misfortunes or bad luck that may come to the newlyweds' married life. It is therefore a cautionary ritual, absence of which would also mean absence of an important preventive ritual in ensuring a happy married life. However, what I found out during my interview with the dancers in Trangka was that a popular story of one of the famed folk heroes in the area, a 20th century anti-colonial resistance leader named Otto Valentin, performed the saya from Trangka towards a hideout deep into the mountains of central Iloilo, thus leading to speculations of the possible roots of the dance and its functions. I consulted alternative sources, but sadly there are no direct primary source that I can trace. I used William Henry Scott's book Barangay as a guide since he mentions Visayan dances including the Sayaw. I also used two dictionaries produced by colonial missionaries. One is the Diccionario de la Lengua Bisaya of Father Alonso de Ventrida, and one is the Kapulungan Binisay in English by Father John Kaufman. For the term Sayaw, Scott mentions that it is a dance of bird-like motions. Ventrida, on the other hand, defined it as a jumping dance. Kaufman defined it as a war dance. So we can infer that the possible roots of the dance may have been started as a war dance, bringing luck in a field of battle, though we may don't know when did it change or be incorporated after a formal wedding ceremony. I also looked into the alternative name of the saya, sinulog or sulog. Matrida defines sulog as a rooster or just come out of age, while Kaufman defines it as a rooster and in another definition to flow with the current rather swiftly. Matrida does not mention any definition for sinulog. However, Kaufman calls sinulog as a war dance with swift movements. What can be noticed here is that the alternative name of the Sayaw connects it to one of the most important ritual paraphernalias used in many rituals in Panay, the chicken. And what can be observed primarily is that the Sayaw can be seen as a form of cockfighting or bulang, especially in its choreography. Philomeno Aguilar Jr., in his book Clash of Spirit, calls it as a cosmic battle between power centers, and the popularity of the practice was a native subtle form of subversion or resistance against the colonial order. Furthermore, in the Tubungan Sayaw, dancers wore red cloth wrapped around their body, similar to the uniform of the Babaylan. Therefore, and to add, the movement of the dance from the church to the reception area shows movement from the colonial space to the indigenous, similar to the Kalibugan or shifting identities expanded by Parius, but here it is shifting spaces. So going back to the questions that I posted earlier, the Sayo is therefore a part of the enduring indigenous systems in rural Iloilo that had survived legacies of colonialism. Looking and observing carefully, the dance revealed the ambiguous nature of the colonial and post-colonial landscape. The movement from the church, a vestige or legacy of colonialism, to the reception area, a space dominated by indigenous systems, mirrors this ambivalent and carnivorous nature of the colonial space. Also, the movement of the dance came into a popular pastime that vehemently controlled by the colonial authorities is an ode to the importance of the chicken or the fowl in the indigenous system. Leading the newlywed couple away from the church resonates the movement of resistance from the church convent center towards the indigenous space, out from the confines of colonial legacy. This is most certainly representative in the Babaylan-based costumes of the dancers in Tubungan. So in conclusion, the enduring indigenous space is reflected in the performance from cockfighting choreography, the symbolisms of color, as well as the movement from the church, a remnant of the colonial space, to the native reception house, an indigenous space. Thus, it is also an enduring identity of Visayan cultural heritage. To finally end, according to post-colonial scholar Partha Chatterjee, the indigenous space is a sovereign territory of the nation, where the colonial state is not allowed entry, even as the outer domain remains surrendered to the colonial power. Thus, the performance of the Sayaw is continuing resistance. Thank you very much, and I am open to further questions.